London, 1836. A city where reputations are born to the sound of violins and die with a whisper. Between chandeliers and scandals, one woman dared to appear at the winter ball, not out of vanity but out of courage. They called her the Duchess everyone pitied, abandoned, humiliated, forgotten. But that night everything would change, because among masks and lies someone was watching, a man everyone believed dead, carrying a secret powerful enough to destroy all of London's nobility. What would happen if the love she mourned for years returned in disguise? And what if the truth, buried by the powerful, was about to bloom in the very place where her pain was born? This is not just a story about romance. It is a story about redemption, courage, and second chances, about the power of a woman who turned rejection into strength and scandal into faith. Get ready to enter the glittering halls of high society, where every glance hides a judgment and every dance can change a destiny. Welcome to the Duchess everyone pitied at the ball, until the Duke she loved appeared in disguise. The winter sky hangs low over Mayfair. Frost bites the iron gates. Carriages line the square like patient beasts. Inside Langthorne House, 1,000 candles argue with the cold. Crystal drips like icicles from the chandeliers. Music floats. Laughter cuts. Esther stands at the threshold of the ballroom. Duchess of Westmere by title, target by habit. Her gown is silk in the shade of warm sand. Beige like a whisper. High waist. Empire lines. Sleeves of gauze. Pearl combs catch the light in her hair. A reticule rests against her wrist. Her gloves are pristine. Her courage is not. She walks forward with the poise girls practice and widows perfect. A murmur begins at the wall of potted bay trees. That is the one. The sad one. The Duchess who could not keep her Duke. The Duchess whose marriage never happened in truth. The Duchess who waits for a ghost. The violins bow a waltz. Couples tilt and breathe. Painted fans open like butterflies ready to flee. Esther nods and smiles and refuses to break. She has learned this performance. Stand tall. Speak little. Drink tea as if it were armor. A debutante in pink whispers behind her fan. Pity is fashionable tonight. Her chaperone adjusts a bonnet ribbon with vicious tenderness. A gentleman pretends not to stare. His wife does not pretend. Esther keeps her eyes on the floor of checkered marble. A diamond of candlelight glides across her bodice. The beige silk warms under the glow. She inhales once. She thinks of the first winter of her marriage. She thinks of vows made before a mirror. She thinks of a bed left artistically untouched. London called it scandal. Esther called it emptiness. The master of ceremonies announces a guest. A gentleman from the continent. A patron of museums. A scholar of languages. A mask hides his face in black satin. His hair is dark and neat. His posture is perfect. He speaks little. His accent is nothing and everything. Every gaze turns. Half the room craves novelty. The other half craves something to crush. Esther looks up. A tremor slips through her. She knows that height, that measured stride, that patience that looks like silence and is in fact strategy. Her heartbeat misbehaves. She locks her hands around her fan. She wills herself to stillness. He moves through the crowd like a rumor with a spine. A plain black tailcoat, a waistcoat stitched with dull silver thread, a starched cravat tied with surgical precision, gloves that fit like second skin, boots glossed to a black mirror. He pauses beneath the chandelier. Light catches the cut of his shoulders. He studies the dancers with cool amusement. He does not seek a partner. He seeks information. The room imagines a prince. It might settle for a scandal. Esther turns away before she drowns. She refuses to be the woman who stares. Along the edge of the floor sit chairs with carved swan necks. She chooses the farthest one. A fern shields her like a friendly sentinel. She breathes. She listens to the gossip as one listens to waves. The Earl of Blackwell arrives with thunder and polished boots. Blackwell wears power like other men wear perfume. Too much, he collects secrets and debts. He smiles as if smiling were a tax he will reclaim with interest. His coat is midnight blue. His rings flash. His voice cuts butter and reputations with equal ease. Blackwell's gaze finds Esther. It lingers, it weighs. He nods with the solemnity of a judge. The room tastes blood. Poor Westmere. Blackwell's tone carries without raising. Poor girl left to pour her own tea. Perhaps the Duke preferred maps to marriage. Laughter follows him like obedient dogs. Esther's spine does not bend. She stores the words in a quiet drawer. Later she will tell herself they are only echoes. Tonight they are knives. A woman glides in and sits beside Esther. Lady Celia Hargreaves, blonde hair pinned beneath a bonnet of ivory straw and velvet. A Spencer jacket, the pale blue of winter sky. Lace peaks at her throat. Her smile warms like a hearth fire. Her eyes hide something fragile and blazing. She squeezes Esther's hand once. Then again. The second squeeze means do not break. Esther answers with a squeeze that means I will not. Celia watches the masked gentleman with careful indifference. Celia has her own secrets. London would not approve of the heart she guards. London seldom approves of honest love. A shadow moves. The masked gentleman stands before the fern. He bows with exact courtesy. He asks for the next waltz. He speaks with a London consonant and a winter vowel. Polite, measured, dangerous. Esther rises without understanding her knees. The crowd's murmur wakes again. Pity curdles into curiosity. Curiosity cooks into scandal the moment it finds heat. They take their place on the floor. The orchestra begins a waltz in 3 polished beats. 1, 2, 3. His hand at her waist is steady. His palm is warm through the silk. Her skin remembers. Her mind denies. He guides without effort. She follows without surrender. They move through candlelight and silk like swimmers through honey. You count. He breathes the words too soft to carry. Count the beats between our glances. If you find 13, you have found me. Esther misses a step. He corrects it before anyone sees. She wants to laugh and weep at the same time. Only one man ever teased her with numbers at a ball. Only one man ever made riddles of their secrets. 13 glances during their first waltz. 13 letters in his mother's maiden name. 13 hours he kept vigil when she fell ill that first spring. 13 is a promise he had once told her. 13 means I return. Her throat tightens. She should demand a name. She should demand the truth. She should demand why. The masked gentleman turns them beneath a cascade of crystal. His scent is cedar and cold air. His jaw is familiar by the angle. His silence is a language she learned 3 years ago and never forgot. The Earl of Blackwell watches with predatory patience. He whispers to the host. The host beckons a footman. A note moves from hand to hand as gracefully as any Duchess. Blackwell does not like new players at his table. He prefers the pieces he already owns. Celia watches too. Her fan hides more than a blush. She knows the gentleman is dangerous to someone. She prays he is not dangerous to Esther. They waltz near the doors to the winter garden. Frost bites the glass. Topiaries stand like soldiers under a moonlit veil. The masked gentleman slows their turn. His voice is a string pulled tight. I was not lost. I was sent away. The traitor breathes among your acquaintances. Esther's heartbeat becomes the metronome of a storm. She keeps her posture. She keeps her smile. She keeps her grace for the sake of every girl watching. The orchestra swells. The couple nearest them stumble and laugh. The room relaxes. Scandal prefers laughter as a chaser. Esther answers with dignity sharpened to a blade. Why return like this? Why not knock at my door like a man? He does not flinch. The mask stays. The voice stays careful. Because if I am seen, someone dies before dawn. The waltz ends. He bows with absolute form. He leads her to the fern again. He does not release her hand until the last acceptable second. The crowd breathes as one creature fed. Whispers breed new whispers. Pairs of eyes calculate. Blackwell lifts his glass to Esther in a toast that is not a toast. He hates puzzles he did not purchase. He hates riddles he cannot answer by invoice. Esther sits. Celia leans near. Who is he? Esther answers with the truth that most protects. No one I can afford to know. Thomas appears at the edge of the chairs. Tall, broad-shouldered. A coat of honest brown wool. He carries the authority of someone who would rather carry wood. Thomas has guarded the Westmere door since the last war. He is the kind of man young footmen copy without understanding why. He bows to Esther with real respect. Your Grace, your carriage will be ready when you desire. His eyes flick across the room. He notes exits. He notes men who drink too little. He notes women who smile too hard. Esther thanks him. She does not rise. The master of ceremonies announces a set of country dances. Laughter returns with relief. It is easier to step than to think. A footman brings tea on a tray chased with ivy. Esther accepts the cup. Heat anchors her fingers. The cup rattles once. She stills it. Celia takes her hand again. Esther, tell me one true thing. Esther watches the doors to the garden. Frost fogs the panes. A shape moves beyond the glass. One true thing. He is not a stranger. Celia squeezes her hand until their gloves creak. Then you must choose what to do with that. London does not forgive hope. Esther rises. The decision is a thread pulled from a fragile weave. She walks to the glass doors. No one stops a Duchess who looks like a queen in the act of leaving. The winter garden exhales cold onto her skin, her breath white in the candle spill. Statues stare with bored mercy. The masked gentleman waits by a stone nymph with a broken hand. He touches his hat. He does not approach too near. He understands the mathematics of public virtue. I have 3 names tonight. He keeps his eyes on the frost, kissing the hedges. One would free me. One would free you. One would kill us both. Esther steps to the boundary between warmth and night. Her beige silk gathers shadows like secrets. Her pearls glow like moon seeds. She asks the question London will ask in sharper words. Are you my husband? He does not answer with a name. He answers with a riddle they made together the night before their wedding. Count the stars that fit on your glove. Stop at 13. Find me where the 13th falls. Esther presses her palm to the cold glass of the door. Stars reflect on the pane like scattered pins. She counts by instinct. 1, 2, 3. Her breath shakes. 13 lands on the reflected point of his shoulder. Her knees soften. She hates her hope and loves it. She hates her doubt and needs it. Blackwell opens the inner door with a flourish that makes the candles bow. He steps onto the threshold. He sets his smile like a trap. How charming. A duchess at prayer in the winter chapel, and a pilgrim whose face offends the light. The masked gentleman straightens. He moves a fraction closer to Esther. A move that can be explained as courtesy. A move that can become a shield in one heartbeat. Blackwell's valet lingers behind him. 2 footmen the host swears he never hired stand at the corridor's bend. The garden grows colder. Esther turns. Her chin lifts. Her voice is a blade dressed as velvet, my lord. Pray inform the orchestra we require a reel. A faster song will help us all warm. Blackwell laughs. He thinks he understands what she is doing. He thinks she is pretending nothing is wrong. He does not understand she is announcing a race. Celia appears like a miracle wearing a shawl of white cashmere. She settles it on Esther's shoulders with theatrical care. She smiles at Blackwell as if he were a dull cousin she must tolerate at holidays. Thomas steps to the open doors at the far end of the garden. He pretends to examine a lantern. He actually measures distance to the stables. The masked gentleman speaks low. The trader sold the map of your husband's route the night before he sailed. The sale happened at a card table in this very house. A lady's bracelet paid the deposit. Esther watches Blackwell's rings. Sapphire, ruby, onyx, no bracelet. Who? The gentleman's eyes cut to the ballroom. Not here, not yet. He reaches into the inner pocket of his tailcoat. He produces a folded card, cream, unmarked. He offers it to her on the flat of his gloved palm. His wrist is steady. His hand is not. She takes the card and does not open it. To open is to choose a future. She is not yet ready to be brave. The orchestra strikes a bright reel. The floor thunders. Laughter rises like steam. Blackwell bows with false gallantry. Do enjoy the garden, your grace. The frost is very fashionable this season. He retreats 3 steps. He does not turn his back. Predators never do. The masked gentleman retreats into shadow. He moves like a soldier trained to vanish in a drawing room. He reaches the U-arch. He pauses. His voice is a thread tied to her heart. If you trust me, do nothing tonight. If you doubt me, open the card at once. He is gone. Esther stands with the card burning in her hand. Celia watches her with eyes that hold both worry and fierce pride. Thomas waits with patience built in war. Esther closes her fingers around the card until the paper sighs. She slips it into her reticule. She returns to the ballroom as if the garden were only air. The dancers spin. The chandeliers sparkle. Blackwell's smile sharpens. Esther chooses a seat near the musicians. She lets the music crawl into her bones and remind them of their names. She breathes until her pulse obeys. She does not open the card. She counts the glances she steals across the crowd. 1, 2, 3. She stops at 13. She finds a shadow near the far door where the footmen bring fresh candles. The shadow looks back. Celia presses her shoulder to Esther's. What will you do? Esther answers the way only a duchess can answer without moving her lips. I will drink tea. I will smile. I will force London to wonder what I know. The reel ends. Applause falls like light rain. The master of ceremonies calls for a cotillion. Blackwell lifts his glass to the musicians. He offers a toast to tradition. His eyes never leave Esther. Thomas shifts his weight near the door to the corridor. He has chosen where he will stand if the night tears. The masked gentleman does not reappear. He is a roomer with bones again. Esther sits very straight. Her beige silk gleams like quiet sand at low tide. She waits. A footman appears with a silver salver. A single white camellia lies on the plate. A card rests beneath the bloom. For Westmere. Esther does not touch it. She nods to the footman to leave it on the chair beside her. Blackwell's gaze narrows. He hates messages he did not intercept. Celia watches the camellia as if it might speak. Thomas watches the door as if it already has. Esther sets her teacup down. No rattle this time, no tremor. She keeps her hands in her lap. She keeps her chin lifted. She keeps her decision for later. The orchestra begins a final waltz for the hour. Couples drift like constellations realigned by gossip. Esther stands. She does not walk to the floor. She walks to the long mirrors that double the candlelight. She wants to see herself as the city sees her. She wants to find the line between pity and power. Her reflection looks back with a steadiness that would frighten a coward. She tips her head. The pearls wink. The silk holds. A shadow arrives in the mirror behind her. Not a mask. Not a duke. A maid with clever eyes and a cap pinned tight. She curtsies. She slides a tiny folded scrap onto the console and vanishes. Esther opens the scrap because it is too small to be a future. Inside is a number. 13. And beneath it a message in a hand she knows as well as her own breath. Count the steps from the mirror to the servant's door. Stop at 13, turn left. Find the truth that tried to drown us. Esther closes the scrap. She does not move. If this story is reaching your heart, don't forget to support it. Subscribe so this love and this channel can keep living. Now let's continue the story. She holds the room's attention by refusing attention. She lets the final waltz end. She lets applause rise. She lets Blackwell smile. She begins to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each echo sounded like a promise she once believed. 5, 6. The ballroom laughter grew. Distant. 7, 8. The mirrors caught her reflection again and again. A duchess wrapped in silk and silence. 9, 10. Her fingers trembled around the scrap of paper hidden in her glove. 11, 12. At 13, she reached the door no guest should notice, veiled behind heavy velvet embroidered with hunting scenes. She slipped through. The corridor smelled of wax and dust, a place built for secrets rather than guests. Lanterns swayed as if startled by her courage. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, familiar. Thomas stepped from the dark. His brown coat looked plain against the golden walls, but his eyes missed nothing. "Your Grace," he murmured with concern carved into his brow. She lifted her chin. Her voice carried the calm of storms yet to break. "Then walk beside me." They descended a narrow stair, the air turning colder with every turn. The stone seemed to hum beneath their steps. At 13, her slipper touched mosaic. Moonlight poured through cracked glass, silvering the broken leaves of forgotten ferns. And there, among the ruins of roses and frost, stood Jorge, Duke of Westmere. Alive. Unmasked. The world seemed to stop breathing. His eyes held the weariness of battlefields and the tenderness of a promise never buried. He looked older, sharper, his jaw shadowed by the years she mourned. The fire she once knew in him had changed. It now burned with purpose, not youth. She stood still, as though afraid he might vanish if she dared blink. He broke the silence first, his voice low, roughened by exile. "I told myself you would not come." Her throat tightened. "And I told myself you were only a dream." Between them stretched 3 years of letters unwritten, rooms unshared, and rumors too cruel to name. She gathered her strength. Why hide? Why let London devour my name while you lived? His answer carried the weight of war. "Because the man who ordered my death sits tonight upstairs drinking my wine." A name bloomed in her mind like poison. Blackwell. He stepped closer. "The traitor sold the map of my mission. I was meant to die before dawn. When I survived, they destroyed my letters, my fortune, my name. You were to be next." Her lips parted, disbelief wrestling with memory. "To ruin us both. To erase us," he said simply. Her heart pounded like the violins above. "And now, why come back?" "Because they will finish the work before the season ends." From his coat he drew a folded paper sealed with wax. Letters marked with her crest, Forged. Used to sell his estates. She stared. You think I am safer knowing this? No. But you are strong enough to face it. Her laugh broke between pain and pride. London thinks I am pitiful. Let them, he said. They will never see the blade until it is drawn. Above them, applause echoed like thunder. Thomas shifted. His tone turned Grialoni. A silhouette appeared at the top of the stair. Celia descended slowly, her shawl pale as morning fog. Forgive me. I followed because I feared he would. Behind her came heavier steps. Blackwell. The Earl entered as if the room were his stage. His smile was polished venom. Well, the ghost lives. How romantic of him to haunt his widow before breakfast. Jorge moved forward, calm as a blade leaving its sheath. You sold the map. Blackwell's smirk faltered for one breath. You should have died in Spain. It would have been simpler. And yet here we are. The silence snapped like glass. Celia reached for the nearest candelabrum and hurled it to the floor. Flames scattered, smoke curling between them. Thomas lunged, catching Blackwell's wrist before the pistol appeared. The Earl twisted free, retreating toward the stairs. Go, Jorge said. He'll bring guards. Celia blocked the path with a grace born of defiance. Let him. London feeds on gossip. We will use it as our shield. Esther turned to Jorge, fire rising in her chest. If you vanish again, I will not forgive it. He met her gaze, the weight of his promise heavy and true. Then I will never vanish. He touched her face, and 3 years of loneliness dissolved in a single breath. His lips met hers, clumsy, desperate, human. The world above danced, but here 2 hearts remembered how to live. When they broke apart, her voice trembled with steel. What now? He unfolded the card she had carried all night. A single name written within. Her pulse faltered. Celia gasped. Lady Pembroke, their hostess. The architect of the evening. The true enemy. Jorge's jaw hardened. Blackwell served her. She bought every betrayal. Celia's eyes widened with horror. Then we stand inside her house. Esther straightened her back, pearls glimmering against her throat. Then let the lady pour her own tea. Tonight we serve justice. She took Jorge's arm. Together they ascended the stair, leaving the cold and the ghosts behind. The shattered candle sputtered out. The music above carried on, blind to the war about to begin. Esther no longer moved like a woman pitied. She moved like a duchess reborn. The night was not over. The riddle was not solved. The war for Westmere had just begun. The orchestra played louder than ever. As if noise could drown the tension, Esther returned to the ballroom, her arm firm around the Duke's. Every head turned. Every whisper sharpened into a blade. The Duchess everyone pitied had come back from the dead, and on her arm walked the ghost they swore she had invented. Eyes widened. Fans froze mid-flutter. The hostesses forgot to breathe. Even the chandeliers seemed to hesitate. Lady Pembroke stood near the grand stair, her gown a storm of silver lace. Her smile was a mask painted with diamonds. A single flicker of fear betrayed her. Esther curtsied with precision sharp enough to cut silk. My lady, how gracious of you to invite the Duke of Westmere to your charming ball. The musicians faltered. A violin squealed. Jorge bowed slightly, every movement a controlled threat. You look surprised, Lady Pembroke. Perhaps you expected a ghost to be less punctual. Polite laughter rippled through the room, but it broke quickly, devoured by curiosity. Blackwell reappeared near the doors, flanked by 2 of his men. His hand rested over the place where his pistol once hid. His smile had disappeared. Celia slipped through the crowd like a whisper, carrying a folded parchment stolen from Blackwell's coat. She met Esther's eyes and gave a faint nod. Esther reached for a glass of champagne from a passing tray. She lifted it high. To the return of those the world wrongly buried. A murmur swelled. Toasts were not meant to sting, yet this one drew blood. Pembroke's voice broke through the hush, honeyed and dangerous. My dear, grief plays tricks. How fortunate that yours found a cure so dramatic. Esther's smile did not waver. Grief teaches us to tell truth from poison. Jorge placed his glass down untouched. His voice was low but carried like a blade sliding free. And poison leaves traces even in crystal. Gasps swept the room. He nodded toward Celia. She handed the parchment to the nearest magistrate who had been sipping brandy by the musician's dais. The seal of Westmere gleamed red under candlelight. The magistrate unfolded the document slowly. He read aloud, his voice grave. A contract of sale forged, signed with the Duchess's name. Witnessed by Lady Pembroke. The ballroom erupted. Fans clattered. Men swore softly behind gloves. The Dowager Countess fainted theatrically on cue. Pembroke's mask cracked. Lies, you cannot prove it. Thomas stepped forward from the servants' entrance holding another paper. He laid it on the table near the champagne tower. The ink was faded but legible. A letter from Pembroke to Blackwell, detailing payments for a certain disappearance. The crowd pressed closer. Esther's voice, calm and clear, rose above the noise. London loves a tale, my lady. Tonight it found its villain. Pembroke's hand darted to her bodice, but before she could move further, Celia caught her wrist with surprising strength. The magistrate signaled to the guards, "Take her." As Pembroke was escorted out, the room buzzed with disbelief. Blackwell slipped toward the door, but Jorge blocked his path. "I trusted you once. That was your mistake." Blackwell's smirk flickered one last time before vanishing into the night with his reputation. The chandeliers burned brighter, as if relieved. Music hesitated, then returned in cautious triumph. Esther stood in the center of the room. The gossip of London had turned on its heels. They no longer whispered poor Duchess. They whispered her grace, the lioness of Westmere. Celia brushed a tear from her cheek and laughed softly. So much for pity. Esther squeezed her hand. Hope tastes better than revenge. Jorge took her hand again, his voice low, just for her. London will not forget this night. She smiled faintly. Then let it remember the truth. They stepped onto the floor as the orchestra began a slow waltz. No masks, no lies. Only two people learning how to breathe again. Her silk dress moved like light across the marble. His hand rested on her waist, steady, certain. Every turn erased another ghost between them. The final note lingered, warm and endless. Outside, dawn began to rise over Mayfair. The frost melted from the glass, leaving trails like tears that belonged to yesterday. Esther looked toward the windows and whispered almost to herself. The world will gossip anyway. Let it gossip about love. Jorge smiled, tired but alive. Then let us give them something worth talking about. They laughed quietly together, the sound soft as morning prayer. Above them, the first sunlight touched the chandeliers, and London's cruelest story became its sweetest legend. If this story is reaching your heart, don't forget to support it. Subscribe so this love and this channel can keep living. Now let's continue the story. Spring arrived late that year, as if the city hesitated to trust in warmth again. The scandal of Lady Pembroke's downfall had traveled faster than any carriage. Every drawing room hummed with versions of the truth. Some said the Duchess of Westmere had plotted revenge. Others said her husband had risen from the grave to save her. All agreed on one thing. London had never been so alive. Esther walked through her garden in the pale light of morning. Her gown, a soft ivory muslin, brushed against the early blooms. The air smelled of roses and whetstone. For the first time in years, she walked without watching who might whisper behind her. The house of Westmere breathed again. Inside the library, Jorge stood before the tall windows. His black coat hung open. He looked less like a duke and more like a man who had remembered how to live. He turned as she entered. Their eyes met, and the silence between them felt warm, not heavy. "You have not been sleeping," she said softly. "I have been thinking," he answered. "About what?" "About how peace feels stranger than war." She smiled. "Then we must learn to live with it." He crossed the room. The sunlight touched his face, revealing lines of exhaustion and something gentler beneath. "There are things still unfinished," he said. "The traitors will stand trial, but that is not what keeps me awake." "Then what does—" His voice dropped lower. "The thought of what I lost when I left." Her hand stilled on the back of a chair. "And what did you lose?" He took a slow breath. "You." The words hung in the air, unguarded and honest. For 3 years she had imagined this moment, rehearsed the anger, the questions, the cold dignity, but when it finally came, all she felt was stillness. "You have found me again," she said. "Do not lose me through silence." He nodded once, then spoke carefully. "The night I sailed, I promised to return when the 13th star rose. I counted every sky I slept under. It never appeared." Esther looked toward the open window. A thin dawn shimmered, and faintly, one by one, stars surrendered to the sun. "Perhaps you looked too far away," she whispered. "The 13th was here, waiting for you to come home." He smiled for the first time without pain. "Then let us never count them again." Celia entered quietly, a tray of tea balanced with elegance. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "London already wonders if you will host another ball," she said. Esther laughed. "London may wait. I prefer my guests honest this time." Celia poured the tea. Her hands no longer trembled when she touched porcelain. Hope had steadied her. Blackwell's estates have been seized, she added. He fled the country last week. Esther looked to Jorge, a quiet end for a loud man. He nodded. Let the world forget him. Celia hesitated, then smiled at both. And what will the world call you now? The Duchess who survived or the Duchess who loved? Esther looked at Lifted. Let them choose. We will be too busy living to correct them. Later, as the morning grew brighter, they walked together to the conservatory. The place where truth had been reborn now glowed with sunlight. New vines crawled up the broken walls. The air smelled of jasmine and rain. Esther reached out and traced the cracks in the glass. He stood beside her, his arm brushing hers. Do you regret anything? He asked. Only the time we wasted fearing the world, she answered. Love is not weakness, it is defiance. He looked at her with quiet reverence. Then let us be defiant forever. A bell rang from the gate. Thomas appeared at the path, smiling like a man who had seen too much but finally believed in good endings. Your Graces, the carriage from Parliament has arrived. They await your statement. Esther and Jorge exchanged a glance. The world still demanded explanations, apologies, details, but none of it mattered now. She adjusted her bonnet and took his arm. If London must have a story, she said, let it be told by those who love, not those who envy. They stepped into the sunlight. The garden shimmered, alive and forgiving. Behind them, the servants opened the great doors. The banners of Westmere hung high again, gold and cream against the blue sky. As they rode away, Esther looked once more toward the estate that had held her sorrow and her strength. Every petal, every wall, every memory whispered the same truth. Rejection had turned to redemption, silence to song, pity to legend. She rested her head on Jorge's shoulder. For the first time in years, her heart was quiet. The carriage rolled on, leaving behind not a scandal but a beginning. London would talk, of course. It always did. But this time it would speak of love that refused to die, and somewhere above the clouds, one last star lingered in daylight. The 13th star. It shone faintly, as if blessing the end of sorrow. And the start of forever, the season bloomed again, glittering and dangerous as ever. Mayfair shone beneath lanterns and gossip ran through the streets faster than carriages. Every night another ball, another scandal, another heart carefully broken for sport. But this time the whispers about the Duchess of Westmere carried something new. Not pity, not disdain, wonder. They said she had forgiven the city that mocked her. They said she smiled at her enemies as though she pitied them in return. They said the Duke adored her so openly that even cynics blushed. Esther laughed when she heard it. London always invented better stories than truth. Still, she preferred this version. She stood before her mirror in the dressing room of Westmere House. Her maid pinned fresh camellias in her auburn hair. The gown was pale green silk with gold embroidery, simple yet radiant, the kind of elegance that made critics lose their nerve. Behind her, Jorge fastened his cufflinks, watching her reflection. You look peaceful, he said. I feel it, she answered. A pause stretched between them, comfortable and warm. He approached, resting his hand on her shoulder. Peace becomes you, he murmured. So does forgiveness, she replied. They shared a brief silence filled with things that did not need to be said. Tonight they were to attend the first ball of the new season, Lady Hargreaves's charity gala. Celia's ball. Their friend had become the talk of the ton herself. Whispers of her quiet bravery had spread since Pembroke's arrest. Celia had found her voice, and London, unable to resist a reformed scandal, adored her for it. The carriage waited. As they stepped out, the street glimmered beneath the lamps. The night smelled of lilac and intrigue. Inside the ballroom, light cascaded from chandeliers like golden rain. The orchestra played a lively waltz. Jorge offered his hand. Shall we remind London how love looks when it survives? She took it without hesitation. They danced. The crowd parted, not from command but from awe. Every motion told the story of their redemption. Every turn whispered of the night they refused to surrender to despair. When the music ended, applause filled the hall. It felt less like flattery and more like relief, as if the whole city had been waiting to exhale. Celia approached, radiant in pale blue silk. Her smile was brighter than the candelabras. You two have made it impossible for anyone else to look interesting tonight. Then we have done our duty, Esther said with mock grace. Celia laughed, but her gaze softened. You changed London, you know. They call you the 13th star. Esther blinked. The name felt strange and beautiful on the tongue. Why? Because you appeared when no one believed you existed. The words landed deep like a benediction. Later that night, as the gala ended, Esther stepped onto the terrace. The city spread before her, glittering like a sea of secrets. The air was cool, scented with jasmine and distant rain. Jorge joined her, draping his coat around her shoulders. He followed her gaze toward the horizon. "Do you think they will ever stop talking about us?" he asked. "No," she said. "But perhaps now they speak to remember, not to wound." He smiled faintly. "And what will they say when we are gone?" She turned toward him, her expression soft but unflinching. "That love is not a tale for poets, but a war for the brave." He took her hand. "Then let them tell it forever." The city bells tolled midnight. Somewhere far above the haze, a single star burned brighter than the rest. Esther tilted her head toward it. There it was again, the 13th star. It had become their sign, their secret covenant. No longer a symbol of waiting, but of peace kept. In that light, her heart felt still. Not because life had grown easy, but because love had learned to endure. She leaned against Jorge, resting her head on his chest. The world might change again tomorrow, but for tonight it was kind. And as the wind stirred the petals of her gown, she thought of the road that had brought them here, the loneliness, the rejection, the cruel laughter of ballrooms. All of it had shaped her. None of it had broken her. When people spoke her name now, they did not say poor Duchess. They said hope. The night deepened. The stars drifted above London's rooftops like scattered prayers. And for once, the city's whispers were gentle. The rain returned that week, soft and persistent, turning the cobblestones of Mayfair into mirrors that reflected lanterns and secrets alike. Westmere House glowed warm against the gray, its windows bright with the quiet rhythm of a home that had finally learned peace. But London never truly slept. Not its people, not its whispers, and not its ghosts. On the third morning of rain, a letter arrived. No crest, no seal, just her name written in ink that bled slightly through the parchment. Esther sat at her writing desk, tea cooling beside her hand. Jorge was in the next room, meeting an envoy about the estates. The clock ticked like a careful heartbeat. She turned the letter over twice before opening it. The handwriting was elegant, familiar in a way that made her stomach tighten. It read, "One secret remains buried beneath your garden. The past never leaves quietly. Count 13 paces from the yew-arch." She stared at the page. No signature. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with that old companion she had once mistaken for it, anticipation. Later, when the rain slowed to mist, she walked alone toward the garden. Her parasol brushed against damp air. The yew-arch waited, dark and dripping with rain. She counted aloud. 1, 2, 3. At 13, she stopped beside a patch of earth slightly uneven. She knelt. The hem of her dress gathered wet soil. Something metal glimmered beneath the roots. Thomas appeared from the path, silent as always, his expression unreadable. "Your Grace," he said gently, "you should not be out here alone." She straightened, brushing her gloves. "Then stay." Together they uncovered a small box, tarnished and heavy. Inside lay a locket. Gold cracked at the hinge. Esther's breath caught. Inside was a miniature portrait, her husband, younger, smiling. And opposite him another image. A woman, not her. Her pulse faltered, then steadied. She turned the locket toward the light. The face was faintly familiar. The brushstrokes fine but hurried. Thomas spoke quietly. "Lady Pembroke's sister. She died 10 years ago." Esther's mind pieced fragments together. The missing letters, the forged seals, the betrayal that had begun years before Jorge's mission. This was older than jealousy, older than greed. Jorge found her standing there moments later, rain clinging to his dark hair. He froze when he saw what she held. "Where did you find that?" "Beneath the yew-arch." He took it from her, his eyes shadowed. "She gave me this the day before I sailed. Said it would keep me safe." Esther's voice softened, but her gaze did not waver. "She loved you." He hesitated. "She thought she did. I was young, foolish, blind to what kindness can disguise." He closed the locket slowly, like sealing a wound. "This was why they targeted me. Her family blamed me for her death. They wanted to destroy everything tied to my name." Esther stepped closer. "And yet we are still here." He looked at her, gratitude and shame warring in his eyes. "Because you refused to die with me." She smiled faintly. "Because I refused to let London decide what was true." He reached for her hand, their fingers cold from the rain. "Then let the past stay buried." "No," she said softly. Let it be remembered so it never happens again. Thunder rolled distant above the rooftops. The air smelled of rain and rebirth. Later that night, as they sat before the fire, the locket rested on the mantel, a reminder that love was not flawless, only brave. Celia visited the next day. "And what will the world call you now? The Duchess who survived or the Duchess who loved?" Esther looked at Lifted. "Let them choose. We will be too busy living to correct them." Later, as the morning grew brighter, they walked together to the conservatory. The place where truth had been reborn now glowed with sunlight. New vines crawled up the broken walls. The air smelled of jasmine and rain. Esther reached out and traced the cracks in the glass. He stood beside her, his arm brushing hers. "Do you regret anything?" he asked. "Only the time we wasted fearing the world," she answered. "Love is not weakness. It is defiance." He looked at her with quiet reverence. "Then let us be defiant forever." A bell rang from the gate. Thomas appeared at the path, smiling like a man who had seen too much but finally believed in good endings. "Your Graces, the carriage from Parliament has arrived. They await your statement." Esther and Jorge exchanged a glance. The world still demanded explanations, apologies, details, but none of it mattered now. She adjusted her bonnet and took his arm. "If London must have a story," she said, "let it be told by those who love, not those who envy." They stepped into the sunlight. The garden shimmered, alive and forgiving. Behind them, the servants opened the great doors. The banners of Westmere hung high again, gold and cream against the blue sky. As they rode away, Esther looked once more toward the estate that had held her sorrow and her strength. Every petal, every wall, every memory whispered the same truth. Rejection had turned to redemption, silence to song, pity to legend. She rested her head on Jorge's shoulder. For the first time in years, her heart was quiet. The carriage rolled on, leaving behind not a scandal but a beginning. London would talk, of course. It always did. But this time it would speak of love that refused to die. And somewhere above the clouds, one last star lingered in daylight. The 13th star. It shone faintly, as if blessing the end of sorrow, and the start of forever. The season bloomed again, glittering and dangerous as ever. Mayfair shone beneath lanterns, and gossip ran through the streets faster than carriages. Every night another ball, another scandal, another heart carefully broken for sport. But this time the whispers about the Duchess of Westmere carried something new. Not pity, not disdain. Wonder. They said she had forgiven the city that mocked her. They said she smiled at her enemies as though she pitied them in return. They said the Duke adored her so openly that even cynics blushed. Esther laughed when she heard it. London always invented better stories than truth. Still, she preferred this version. She stood before her mirror in the dressing room of Westmere House. Her maid pinned fresh camellias in her auburn hair. The gown was pale green silk with gold embroidery, simple yet radiant, the kind of elegance that made critics lose their nerve. Behind her, Jorge fastened his cufflinks, watching her reflection. "You look peaceful," he said. "I feel it," she answered. A pause stretched between them, comfortable and warm. He approached, resting his hand on her shoulder. "Peace becomes you," he murmured. "So does forgiveness," she replied. They shared a brief silence filled with things that did not need to be said. Tonight they were to attend the first ball of the new season, Lady Hargreaves's charity gala. Celia's ball. Their friend had become the talk of the ton herself. Whispers of her quiet bravery had spread since Pembroke's arrest. Celia had found her voice, and London, unable to resist a reformed scandal, adored her for it. The carriage waited. As they stepped out, the street glimmered beneath the lamps. The night smelled of lilac and intrigue. Inside the ballroom, light cascaded from chandeliers like golden rain. The orchestra played a lively waltz. Jorge offered his hand. "Shall we remind London how love looks when it survives?" She took it without hesitation. They danced. The crowd parted, not from command but from awe. Every motion told the story of their redemption. Every turn whispered of the night they refused to surrender to despair. When the music ended, applause filled the hall. It felt less like flattery and more like relief, as if the whole city had been waiting to exhale. Celia approached, radiant in pale blue silk. Her smile was brighter than the candelabras. "You two have made it impossible for anyone else to look interesting tonight." "Then we have done our duty," Esther said with mock grace. Celia laughed, but her gaze softened. "You changed London, you know. They call you the 13th star." Esther blinked. The name felt strange and beautiful on the tongue. "Why?" Because you appeared when no one believed you existed. The words landed deep like a benediction. Later that night, as the gala ended, Esther stepped onto the terrace. The city spread before her, glittering like a sea of secrets. The air was cool, scented with jasmine and distant rain. Jorge joined her, draping his coat around her shoulders. He followed her gaze toward the horizon. "Do you think they will ever stop talking about us?" he asked. "No," she said. "But perhaps now they speak to remember, not to wound." He smiled faintly. "And what will they say when we are gone?" She turned toward him, her expression soft but unflinching. "That love is not a tale for poets, but a war for the brave." He took her hand. "Then let them tell it forever." The city bells tolled midnight. Somewhere far above the haze, a single star burned brighter than the rest. Esther tilted her head toward it. There it was again, the 13th star. It had become their sign, their secret covenant, no longer a symbol of waiting but of peace kept. In that light her heart felt still, not because life had grown easy, but because love had learned to endure. She leaned against Jorge, resting her head on his chest. The world might change again tomorrow, but for tonight it was kind. And as the wind stirred the petals of her gown, she thought of the road that had brought them here. The loneliness, the rejection, the cruel laughter of ballrooms. All of it had shaped her. None of it had broken her. When people spoke her name now, they did not say "poor Duchess." They said hope. The night deepened. The stars drifted above London's rooftops like scattered prayers, and for once the city's whispers were gentle. The rain returned that week, soft and persistent, turning the cobblestones of Mayfair into mirrors that reflected lanterns and secrets alike. Westmere House glowed warm against the gray, its windows bright with the quiet rhythm of a home that had finally learned peace. But London never truly slept. Not its people, not its whispers, and not its ghosts. On the third morning of rain, a letter arrived. No crest, no seal, just her name, written in ink that bled slightly through the parchment. Esther sat at her writing desk, tea cooling beside her hand. Jorge was in the next room meeting an envoy about the estates. The clock ticked like a careful heartbeat. She turned the letter over twice before opening it. The handwriting was elegant, familiar in a way that made her stomach tighten. It read, "One secret remains buried beneath your garden. The past never leaves quietly. Count 13 paces from the yew arch." She stared at the page. No signature. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with that old companion she had once mistaken for it, anticipation. Later, when the rain slowed to mist, she walked alone toward the garden. Her parasol brushed against damp air. The yew arch waited, dark and dripping with rain. She counted aloud. 1, 2, 3. At 13, she stopped beside a patch of earth slightly uneven. She knelt. The hem of her dress gathered wet soil. Something metal glimmered beneath the roots. Thomas appeared from the path, silent as always, his expression unreadable. "Your Grace," he said gently, "you should not be out here alone." She straightened, brushing her gloves. "Then stay." Together they uncovered a small box, tarnished and heavy. Inside lay a locket, gold cracked at the hinge. Esther's breath caught. Inside was a miniature portrait, her husband, younger, smiling. And opposite him another image. A woman, not her. Her pulse faltered, then steadied. She turned the locket toward the light. The face was faintly familiar, the brushstrokes fine but hurried. Thomas spoke quietly. "Lady Pembroke's sister. She died 10 years ago." Esther's mind pieced fragments together. The missing letters, the forged seals, the betrayal that had begun years before Jorge's mission. This was older than jealousy, older than greed. Jorge found her standing there moments later, rain clinging to his dark hair. He froze when he saw what she held. "Where did you find that?" "Beneath the yew arch." He took it from her, his eyes shadowed. "She gave me this the day before I sailed. Said it would keep me safe." Esther's voice softened, but her gaze did not waver. "She loved you." He hesitated. "She thought she did. I was young, foolish, blind to what kindness can disguise." He closed the locket slowly, like sealing a wound. "This was why they targeted me. Her family blamed me for her death. They wanted to destroy everything tied to my name." Esther stepped closer, "And yet we are still here." He looked at her, gratitude and shame warring in his eyes. "Because you refused to die with me." She smiled faintly. "Because I refused to let London decide what was true." He reached for her hand, their fingers cold from the rain. "Then let the past stay buried." "No," she said softly. Let it be remembered so it never happens again. Thunder rolled distant above the rooftops. The air smelled of rain and rebirth. Later that night, as they sat before the fire, the locket rested on the mantel, a reminder that love was not flawless, only brave. Celia visited the next day. She saw survive it. Celia smiled knowingly. That is what makes your story dangerous, my dear. It teaches others they can survive too. When Celia left, the house grew quiet again. Jorge watched the flames, thoughtful. Do you ever miss the life before all this? She considered. No, because that was a life I lived to please them. This one I live to please God and myself. He smiled, reaching for her hand. Then we are finally free. Outside, the rain faded and the first stars returned. She looked through the window and found it again, the faint glimmer of the 13th star. It shone brighter tonight, perhaps in gratitude, perhaps in warning. Either way, it was theirs. Esther leaned her head against his shoulder. No ghost left to haunt, no pity left to bear, only the quiet triumph of love that endured the unendurable. London would, of course, whisper again by morning, but this time its stories would end with hope. And somewhere beneath the yew-arch the earth rested at peace. The night folded softly over Westmere House. Rain had passed, leaving the world washed clean and smelling faintly of lilac and coal. Inside, the candles burned lower, their flames steady as the quiet between two heartbeats. The Duke and Duchess sat in the library, the fire casting gold across the room. Between them lay the locket glinting faintly in the glow. A relic of betrayal, yes, but also proof that truth survives silence. Thomas entered, his boots damp, his face solemn. He held an envelope sealed with red wax, no crest, no name. Again. Esther's pulse trembled once before she steadied it. Jorge took the letter and examined the seal. It had been pressed with a signet crudely carved, a rose with 13 petals. He broke it open. Inside, only a single sheet. The ink smeared slightly as if written in haste. The past was not buried deep enough. She had help. Jorge read it twice, then passed it to Esther. Her brow furrowed. Lady Pembroke was imprisoned. Her sister long dead, then who? Thomas's voice was low. Someone still inside the circle, Celia perhaps visiting again tomorrow, would have called it poetic justice. But Esther did not believe in coincidence. Not in London. Not in this city built on half-truths and inheritance. That night she could not sleep. The rain returned before dawn, tapping lightly against the glass as if repeating a secret. She rose and walked to the window. The gardens lay silver under the moonlight. The yew-arch stood dark and dignified, concealing more than roots. Behind her, Jorge stirred. You should rest, he murmured. She turned toward him, her face soft yet alert. Someone still watches us. He sat up, the glow of the fire outlining his frame. Then we will watch back. At breakfast, Celia arrived precisely as the clock struck 10, bringing gossip wrapped in laughter. She carried a basket of early strawberries and the usual dose of mischief. Thomas opened the door, nodded politely, and vanished again down the hall. Celia settled into her chair, gloved hands gesturing as she spoke. Did you hear, my dear? Pembroke's trial has been postponed again. Her solicitors claim new evidence has surfaced. Esther Spoon paused mid-air. What kind of evidence? Letters, old ones. They say written by her sister to a lover who vanished before the war. Jorge's gaze met Esther's. Their thoughts collided in silence. Another thread in the same tapestry. When Celia left, the air felt colder. That evening, Jorge rode to the magistrate's office. He returned late, the scent of rain clinging to him like memory. Esther waited by the fire, wrapped in a shawl of ivory wool. What did they say? He removed his gloves slowly. The letters exist. They were delivered anonymously, and one of them bears your name. Her heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from disbelief. Mine, written in a different hand, but yes. They think you corresponded with Pembroke's sister before the Duke's voyage. Esther stood, her voice steady but edged. They want to undo what we restored. He nodded. London does not forgive miracles. It only tries to rewrite them. She paced the carpet, silk brushing softly against the rug. Then we must uncover who keeps feeding the fire. Jorge approached, resting his hand on her arm. We will, but not with anger. With truth. She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. Truth needs a voice. And this time it will be mine. The next morning, invitations were delivered across London, handwritten, sealed with the crest of Westmere. A small gathering, the note said, to celebrate renewal and friendship. But the city knew better. No one refused a duchess who had defeated scandal, and no one ignored a summons from redemption itself. By nightfall, carriages lined the square. Silks rustled. Diamonds flashed. Every guest arrived with curiosity disguised as courtesy. The ballroom, once filled with whispers of pity, now gleamed with confidence. The chandeliers burned brighter than ever. Esther descended the staircase with the grace of a queen and the calm of someone who had already survived the worst. Jorge stood waiting at the foot of the stairs, his hand extended. Their eyes met and the crowd hushed without command. She smiled faintly, then turned to the gathering. "My friends," she said, her voice smooth and clear, "London has taught me that stories live longer than facts. Tonight I choose to tell mine." Murmurs rippled through the hall. She gestured to a table beside her where the locket rested next to a stack of old letters, bound by a silver ribbon. "These were meant to destroy us," she continued. "Instead, they revealed the truth." She untied the ribbon. The pages bore ink faded but legible, the confessions of a woman long gone, Lady Pembroke's sister, writing of guilt and conspiracy. "I was told he would never return," one line read. "They said the ship would burn before reaching the coast." Gasps spread through the crowd like wind through flame. Esther lifted her chin. The lies were theirs. The shame was theirs. But the lesson is ours. She turned toward Jorge. "Love cannot be silenced by rumor. It endures because it chooses to." The room fell silent, every face softened by something rare. Admiration without envy. Jorge took her hand, pride and tenderness shining through his calm. Together, they faced the sea of eyes that had once judged them. And for the first time, London applauded not scandal but grace. Outside, thunder rolled once more, distant but promising. The rain began again, gentle, forgiving. The ballroom windows shimmered with its light. In that moment, Esther knew the letter from the shadows had not been a threat. It had been a warning, a test of resolve. The past had tried to rise again. But this time she met it standing tall, hand in hand with the man who had learned to return. And somewhere beyond the storm, the 13th star broke through the clouds, glowing steady above London's restless heart. The rain vanished as quickly as it came. By the end of the week, the streets of Mayfair shone under a cautious sun, and invitations fluttered through the city like migrating birds. Among them, one stood out, gilded at the edges, sealed with black wax. Masquerade at Lord Ashworth's residence to celebrate the renewal of peace between houses. Peace in London was simply a word wrapped in perfume. Behind every dance, a duel. Behind every smile, a debt. Esther received her invitation with a quiet smile. Another stage. Another storm. She turned the card in her hands, tracing the wax seal. The symbol pressed into it, a rose with 13 petals. Jorge read it beside her, his jaw tightening. Again. She nodded. "Whoever plays this game refuses to stop." He looked toward the garden through the tall windows. "Then we end it. Publicly." That evening, the house filled with preparations. Celia arrived with bolts of silk and opinions sharp enough to cut them. "If London insists on masks, my dear, then wear the one that blinds them." Her gown was chosen before the hour ended. A deep emerald satin that made her eyes blaze like candlelight behind glass. Jorge's coat was black, the silver embroidery tracing patterns that caught the eye and never released it. Thomas watched from the doorway as the servants adjusted the Duke's cravat. "You trust this invitation, Your Grace?" Jorge shook his head. "But I trust my wife." At twilight, the carriage rolled through the damp streets. The city buzzed with anticipation. No one admitted it aloud, but every noble in London wanted to see the Duchess of Westmere again. The woman who had tamed scandal and made truth fashionable. Lord Ashworth's mansion stood ablaze with light. Masked guests spilled through its doors, laughter and secrets blending into music. Candles floated in mirrored bowls. Perfumed smoke curled around marble pillars. Esther descended from the carriage with the poise of a woman who knew her worth. Her mask of gold lace covered only half her face, leaving her eyes exposed, sharp, unafraid. Inside, the masquerade pulsed like a heartbeat. Strings, silk, and sin. Men bowed too low. Women smiled too long. Jorge's hand brushed hers, a silent promise. They would not separate tonight. At the center of the room, a figure in silver stood watching them. Tall, elegant, motionless. The mask covered everything but the mouth. A mouth curved into a knowing smile. Esther felt it before she understood it. That weight of familiarity. That chill of recognition. The stranger approached, bowing with perfect decorum. The accent when he spoke was London softened by something foreign. "Your Grace, you honor the night." She inclined her head politely. "And you hide well behind your silver." He smiled. "The world is kinder to ghosts when they wear masks." Jorge's gaze hardened. "Remove it then." The stranger tilted his head, amused. "Not yet, some truths deserve music first." The orchestra began a slow waltz. He extended a hand to Esther. "For old times, perhaps." Jorge stepped forward, but Esther's fingers had already met the stranger's. Not in acceptance. In challenge. The room watched. The Duchess, who had once been pitied, now glided across the floor with a phantom. Every movement a conversation. Every turn a question. "Who are you? Why do you know my secrets?" He leaned close enough for only her to hear. "The woman in the locket was not who you thought. Her sister lived longer than history remembers." Her pulse stumbled. "What do you mean?" "She died in my arms, and with her last breath she spoke your name." The violins climbed to a shivering note. The dance ended, applause breaking the spell. Esther stepped back, her breath sharp in her chest. The stranger bowed once more, then disappeared into the crowd. Jorge appeared beside her instantly, his eyes burning. What did he say? She looked toward the place where the silver mask had vanished. "That the story is not over." Outside, thunder rolled again, though the sky was clear. Later that night, as they returned home, the locket on the mantel had fallen open by itself. Inside, the miniature portrait seemed almost alive in the flicker of the firelight. And between them, something new. A thin slip of parchment folded once, tucked between the faces. Esther reached for it, her fingers trembling. It bore the same rose with 13 petals. She unfolded it. Only a single line. "Not all ghosts stay buried, my Duchess. Some learn to dance." The candles trembled as if in applause. And somewhere in the city, behind a silver mask, someone watched the light of Westmere burn through the night. The morning after the masquerade arrived with a strange golden calm. The streets gleamed after the night's mist. The carriages hummed, and the city pretended, as it always did, that nothing had happened. But inside Westmere House, truth refused to rest. The locket now sat on Esther's writing desk beside the parchment with the mocking phrase. Its gold caught every beam of sunlight, as though determined to remind her that even beauty could wound. Jorge paced the library, hands behind his back, every step measured and precise. He was not a man easily shaken, but this was no ordinary threat. The name of his late friend. The symbol. The audacity of the dance. Esther watched him from the doorway. "You believe the man was lying?" He stopped. "I believe he knew too much, and too confidently. Then he is either a fool or a witness." He turned toward her, or both. She entered the room, calm as a tide hiding a storm beneath. Every instinct told her this story was older than their marriage, older than their grief. "There is a pattern," she said. "The letters. The locket. The rose with 13 petals. Whoever plays this game wants us to keep remembering." Jorge nodded slowly. "And memory is the cruelest weapon London owns." He walked to the window. Outside, the servants tended the wet gardens, trimming the ivy around the yew arch. The sight pulled a faint shiver through him. "It began there," he murmured. "It may end there, too." Before he could say more, Thomas entered, holding a visiting card on a small silver tray. "Delivered by a boy, Your Grace, no name given." Jorge took it. The card was blank, save for a single pressed rose petal sealed under a thin layer of wax. 13 points perfectly cut. He looked at Esther. "The ghost is calling again." Later that afternoon, Celia arrived unannounced, cheeks flushed with the excitement of new gossip. Her gown was lavender, her bonnet tipped at a defiant angle. She set her gloves aside and exhaled dramatically. "My darling, you have done it again. The entire city hums about last night. They say a ghost danced with you and the Duke nearly dueled him." Esther smiled faintly. "They are not entirely wrong." Celia blinked. "You jest." "If only," Esther whispered. When Celia saw the locket and the note, her amusement dimmed. "That symbol again," she said softly. "I saw it once before. Where?" "In Pembroke's old estate, painted above the servants' staircase. A rose with 13 petals. She said it was her family's emblem, though no record ever listed it." Esther's pulse quickened. Then the sister, the one who supposedly died, might have carried it too. Celia hesitated. Or someone who wanted her remembered. The clock struck 3. Outside, a carriage arrived. Thomas appeared again, his expression unreadable. "A messenger, Your Grace. He says it is urgent." Jorge motioned for him to enter. A young man stepped forward, rein still clinging to his coat. He handed over an envelope and left without a word. Esther broke the seal. Inside, a folded letter written in familiar looping script, the same hand as the first message from the shadows. She read aloud. If you seek the truth, come to Pembroke Manor at dusk. Bring no guards. Bring only courage. Celia paled. You cannot go. It is madness. Jorge took the letter, his voice steady but dark. That is precisely why we must. At dusk, the carriage rolled toward the outskirts of London. Mist gathered over the fields. The sky bled into twilight. Pembroke Manor loomed ahead, abandoned since the trial. Its windows empty. Its gardens wild. Its gates open as if expecting them. Thomas drove, though he disliked every inch of the plan. Celia remained behind, promising to alert the magistrate if they did not return by midnight. Inside, dust hung in the air like fog. Every sound echoed twice, as if the house itself were whispering. Esther walked beside Jorge, holding a lantern. The portraits on the walls followed them with eyes painted in another century. They reached the grand staircase. At its base, a figure waited, the man in the silver mask. He stood calm, almost solemn. The lantern light shimmered across his faceplate. You came, he said quietly. We came for truth, Esther answered. He nodded once. Then listen. He removed the mask. The firelight revealed a face scarred and weary. Older than she expected, yet not unfamiliar. Jorge stepped forward, disbelief twisting his voice. Henry Pembroke! The man bowed his head. Once. Long ago. Yes. Esther felt her breath freeze. But you are supposed to be dead. He smiled faintly. In London, death is often a convenient costume. He lifted a small leather-bound journal and held it out. Everything is here. The forgeries, the names, the payments. Your ruin was planned long before the voyage. It began when my sister loved you. Jorge's eyes darkened. She was innocent. She was ambitious, Henry said. And our family was desperate. When she died, they blamed you to survive. Pembroke Gold bought the silence of too many tongues. He looked at Esther, regret clouding his gaze. I tried to stop them. When I failed, I hid. I sent the first letter because I feared the last piece would vanish with me. Esther stepped closer, voice calm but cutting. And what do you want now? He hesitated. Forgiveness, perhaps, or at least for the truth to outlive me. He placed the journal in her hands. The pages were brittle, filled with dates, seals, and signatures of men who still ruled London's drawing rooms. A storm of history written in ink and shame. Henry exhaled slowly. Now you know. Before she could speak, a gunshot shattered the silence. The lantern fell. The room exploded in light and smoke. Henry staggered, clutching his chest. Jorge caught him before he hit the floor. From the doorway, a shadow vanished into the night. Esther knelt beside them, the journal still clutched in her hand. Henry's lips moved, blood darkening his collar. One more rose, he whispered. Under the arch. The 13th blooms tonight. Then he was gone. Jorge held him for a moment longer, his jaw locked, his breath steady only by will. Esther rose, turning toward the open doors. Mist swirled through the entryway, carrying the faint scent of roses. She looked at Jorge. Then we finish it. He nodded once. For truth, for peace, for Westmere. Outside, thunder growled low across the horizon, as if London itself were listening. And beneath the stormlight, the 13th rose waited to bloom. Night fell heavy and blue over the grounds of Pembroke Manor. The wind hissed through the yew arch as though whispering its own secrets. Lightning clawed across the clouds, lighting the path only long enough to make it more frightening. Esther and Jorge walked side by side through the overgrown garden, the rain slicking their coats and clinging to the lantern flame that refused to die. Behind them, the empty house groaned with the wind. Somewhere inside, the echoes of the gunshot still lived. Henry Pembroke's body had been covered. Thomas stood guard until the magistrate would arrive. But Esther could not wait. The words the dying man had spoken burned too bright in her chest. The 13th rose blooms tonight. The rain slowed as they neared the arch. The air smelled of iron and memory. Lightning flashed again, and there it was, beneath the hedge, half hidden by ivy and shadow. A rose bush, wild and defiant, bearing a single bloom. 13 petals. The exact symbol carved into every letter, every secret, every lie. Jorge knelt beside it, brushing soil away from its roots. Something metallic glinted beneath. A box, small, rusted. He forced the lock open with the tip of his knife. Inside lay a packet of letters sealed and wrapped in oilcloth. The wax still bore the Pembroke crest. Esther unfolded the first. To the Duke of Westmere, if you read this, then my warning failed. They will turn her against you. The Duchess will suffer what I could not prevent. Protect her, for she carries what they want most. She stared at the page until the ink blurred. Jorge's voice was barely audible. They used her to get to you. The second letter was signed by the same hand, Henry Pembroke's sister. But the last page was different. But sullen obedience to lies is sin. A ripple of murmurs spread, quickly silenced. She continued, when the Duke of Westmere vanished, you all decided what my story would be. When he returned, you decided again. But love is not a performance to be judged. It is the quiet work of faith. Somewhere in the crowd, Celia dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, whispering something that made the man beside her blush. Esther's voice grew softer, steadier. Every woman in this room has been measured by whispers. Every man has at some point chosen silence over truth. I did both and nearly lost myself for it. But if this city, this glittering maze of gossip and grace has taught me anything, it is that kindness is the most radical act of all. She glanced toward Jorge, who watched her with a smile only she could read. You once called me the Duchess everyone pitied. Let me tell you what pity becomes when it refuses to die. It becomes compassion. It becomes the strength to forgive. And it becomes the courage to begin again. A silence deeper than respect filled the chamber. Esther drew a breath and lifted her chin. If we want a better London, we must first stop using shame as entertainment. Let us trade judgment for mercy, envy for admiration, and fear for truth. Because the world does not need more perfect people. It needs people who survive, then teach others how. Applause began at the back, hesitant at first, then rising like rain on glass. Men stood. Women followed. For the first time in its history, the walls of Parliament echoed with sincerity instead of strategy. Jorge approached her as she stepped down from the dais. His eyes shone with pride. You didn't speak to them, he said softly. You changed them. She smiled, then let them whisper about that for a century. Outside, the crowd waited. When she appeared at the top of the steps, umbrellas lifted like flowers. A cheer rolled through the square. Rain fell in silver threads, warm and forgiving. Celia pushed through the crowd, soaked and grinning. You were magnificent, she said breathlessly. I could almost hear the dowager faint from the shock. Esther laughed, light and unguarded. Then I suppose London has seen a miracle after all. Jorge offered his arm. Come, my Duchess. The roses are waiting. They returned to Westmere that night, the carriage wheels cutting through puddles that reflected the gas lights of the city. Esther looked out the window as the skyline faded behind them. The Thames shimmered like a ribbon of memory, and above it, faint and constant, the 13th star burned. When they reached home, the rain had stopped. The garden glistened. The roses, heavy with water, bowed toward the earth in graceful silence. Esther walked among them, touching each bloom with quiet gratitude. Jorge followed, watching her as one watches a sunrise after too many dark nights. She turned to him, her voice low and certain. The world will forget our scandals, our pain, even our names, but it will never forget what love can survive. He took her hand, kissed her palm, and whispered, Nor will I. The wind stirred the leaves. The roses trembled softly as though nodding in agreement. The 13th rose stood tallest, bright as flame in the moonlight. And for the first time in London's long and restless history, silence felt holy. London, autumn 1840. The city had changed again. New dukes ruled the gossip columns. New scandals bloomed where old ones had finally faded. And yet, somewhere beyond the noise, beyond the gaslight and the thunder of carriages, the legend of Westmere endured, spoken softly like a prayer. They said the Duchess who had once been pitied had become something far greater. A voice for mercy in a world that adored cruelty, a living reminder that grace could be sharper than revenge. Far from Mayfair in the quiet countryside, Westmere House stood serene under a sky painted in lavender dusk. The roses in the garden were heavy with late bloom. 13 bushes now grew in perfect circle around the old yew arch, each one planted from a cutting of the first. Esther walked slowly among them, a shawl over her shoulders, her hair now threaded with silver. Her beauty had changed, but her eyes still carried the calm of someone who had survived fire and learned to love the ashes. The evening air smelled of earth and rain. Every step felt like memory, but none like regret. She reached the 13th rose. Its petals glowed crimson in the dying light. Her fingers brushed it gently as if greeting an old friend. Behind her, familiar footsteps. The same rhythm, the same patience. Jorge approached, his smile softened by years and peace. The weight of his past had become only part of his strength. He stopped beside her, his hand finding hers without needing to search. "The roses are early this year," he said quietly. "They always are when peace lingers too long," she answered. He laughed under his breath. "Then may they never sleep again." They stood together beneath the arch. The sun dipped lower, spilling gold through the trees until the garden seemed aflame. "Do you remember," he asked, "that first winter, when London thought us finished?" "I remember," she said. "I also remember forgiving it." He turned to her, his gaze warm. "You made forgiveness look like rebellion." She smiled. "And you made love look like faith." They walked back toward the house. The windows glowed with candlelight. Celia's laughter carried faintly from inside. She was visiting again, of course, bringing far too much energy and far too little restraint. Some things never changed, and that was a comfort. When they reached the terrace, Esther paused, glancing once more toward the sky. The stars were beginning to appear one by one, shy and silver. And there, just above the horizon, faint but steady, the 13th star. She lifted her hand toward it, a gesture half blessing, half farewell. For years it had been her omen, her secret, her sign of survival. Now it was simply a reminder that love, once real, could never be erased. Jorge stood behind her, his voice quiet but certain. "You still count them." "Always," she said softly. "Not to find you anymore. Just to remember that I did." He wrapped his arm around her, drawing her close. "The world will forget everything else, Esther. But not you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then let it forget my name, but remember what it meant." They watched the horizon together as the light faded. The wind rustled through the roses, carrying a fragrance that felt like forgiveness. Somewhere in the city, miles away, bells rang the hour. But here time felt kind. The story had been written, rewritten, and finally put to rest. As the stars brightened, the 13th burned brightest of all, not as an omen, not as warning, but as a quiet celebration of everything that love had survived. Esther smiled, closing her eyes. The wind touched her cheek like an old friend, and in that soft hush between heartbeats she whispered to the sky, "Thank you." And if heaven listened as she believed it did, it answered in silence, the purest peace of all. The roses swayed. The stars shone, and London, somewhere far behind them, slept beneath their light. There are stories that end with a scandal, and there are stories that begin after forgiveness. The Duchess of Westmere taught us that pain does not define who we are. What defines us is how we rise after being broken. She was humiliated, abandoned, and turned into a rumor. But instead of becoming bitterness, she became grace. She proved that love is not the absence of wounds, it is the courage to keep the heart open after it bleeds. Sometimes life will make you the subject of whispers. Sometimes the world will watch to see if you fall. Let them watch. Because when you stand again, even quietly, you will shine brighter than their noise. No one is beyond redemption. No heart is too late to heal. And no storm lasts forever. If this story touched you, leave your heart in the comments below. Tell me what part of Esther's journey spoke to yours. Your words help me keep creating stories of courage, second chances, and love that endures. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next tale from the world of Regency London, where every whisper hides a truth and every heart deserves a new beginning. Let's keep this world of love and hope alive together, because just like Esther, you too can bloom again.